Good morning and welcome to day two of the 2020 annual Almond Conference. My name is Julie Adams, Vice President, Global Technical and Regulatory Affairs for the Almond Board, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's general session. Now, I hope you've enjoyed the State of the Industry presentation that you saw yesterday and the breakout sessions. It's been quite an amazing year, I think, for all of us. And even though our conference is virtual, we're hoping that we're not only going to meet, but we're going to exceed your expectations. You still have the opportunity to visit an incredible number of sessions, research updates, and exhibitors that are involved in this year's annual conference. Another opportunity we have this year with a virtual format is that we have a number of speakers who might not have been able to travel to California otherwise. So there's some benefit really of having a virtual meeting. Now, while we won't be seeing you in the hallways or joining you for dinner, we hope you'll be seeing your colleagues in our virtual lounge and also coming over to visit us in the Almond Board booth. Certainly, we're going to be there all week. So what I'd like to do is jump into today's general session. Now, as we look at the big picture on a global level, we've really seen some significant changes occurring. And that's really a result of the business climate having to address a number of situations, whether it's trade agreements, disputes, regulatory standards. We've seen a real intensification of consumer expectations this past year. And you add to that a pandemic that has really changed the way we do business, and it's impacted not only supply chains, but really it started to point out perhaps some weaknesses in our food production system. And that's something that we really want to talk about today. So being in agriculture means you're already used to dealing with change, whether it's a change in a regulatory requirement in a market you're shipping to, or Mother Nature deciding she has different ideas about the production cycle. You have to deal with change. But with a crop like almonds, what we have to really do is think about not just the here and now, but what's on the horizon. What is it we have to be prepared for as we go forward? And that's really where we want to focus on what are some of those trends that are going to shape the way we need to be thinking about our business, our communities as we go forward. Fortunately for us, the California almond industry is really pretty well positioned to meet the challenges and take advantage of some opportunities that we see on the horizon. Now, to share their thoughts on the big picture and what are some of the lessons for agriculture, I'm really happy to introduce our two speakers today. First of all, Ambassador Darci Vetter. Darci was formerly the Chief Ag Negotiator at the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. She's now Vice Chair for Agriculture, Food, and Trade with Edelman Communications. Now, Darci's been closely involved in helping clients navigate this rapidly changing policy landscape. She's also been busy helping to develop business and communication strategies that are going to address not only some of the trade tensions, but what about supply chains and sustainability initiatives? Our second speaker is Krysta Harden. Now, Krysta is no stranger to ag policy, having been the USDA's Deputy Secretary. She's now Executive VP for Global Environmental Strategy for Dairy Management, Inc., and also the Chief Operating Officer for U.S. Dairy Export Council. Now, Krysta has a key leadership role when it comes to helping define the vision, strategy, and forward planning for dairy. But importantly, she's really closely involved in helping the dairy community as they identify the science, best practices, and the metrics that are really going to contribute to a sustainable food system. So with that, Darci, let's turn it over to you. Why don't you kick us off with some discussions about the big picture. What are some of those pieces that are really going to start coming together and shaping the way we need to look at the world?
Great. Well, thank you very much, Julie. Thanks for having me. It's just a pleasure to be able to talk with you and with Krysta this morning and to virtually be with your members today. I'm going to start a little bit on the big picture, thinking about the international trading environment. And I think Krysta then will kind of take it from there and we'll put the pieces together and set the stage a little bit. This has been a turbulent past few years for almonds in the trading environment. There have been real changes in the market access and the tariff conditions that you face with key trading partners. And I wish I could say that heading into 2021, I thought those tensions might magically ease. But I think what we should expect is that a lot of those trade tensions will continue. The Biden and incoming Biden administration saying, we do want to examine this relationship with China. We want to think about the basis on which we engage China, but we're not going to upend the apple cart on the current tariffs or the phase one agreement that's in place. We're going to take our time to reset that. We're going to think about the leverage we need because China's trade practices are still unfair. And while tariffs and using tariffs as leverage may not have been their first choice, that is a tool that's in place that they have now. So it may be some time before tariffs and the retaliatory tariffs we've seen on US ag products, before those things go away. I do actually see some glimmers of hope, however, when it comes to the European Union. And that is, of course, because we need our allies to put more pressure on China than we've been able to put on them unilaterally. So you've seen actually just in the past couple of days some interesting overtures from the incoming administration and the EU leadership about opportunities to resolve trade disputes like that about Boeing Airbus, where we have retaliatory tariffs on agriculture in place, and thinking about how they might sit down and talk about where they could push jointly for reforming China's practices, looking at the WTO differently, where can the US and the EU cooperate? So some of those near-term tensions with the EU might be resolved, which could be very positive. But overall, I think we also have to think about the broader context, not just the US relationship with other countries on trade, but something to watch is the US's competitiveness overall as other countries do their own deals. And just a week or two ago, we saw the RCEP countries, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, China, some others come together and sign their regional trade agreement. It's not as comprehensive as the type of deals that the United States normally does with other countries. It got to about 90% of tariffs will eventually be eliminated. Some of those have kind of long phase out periods, but this is a huge block of countries in Southeast Asia that have, committed to really uniting their economies and giving each other key tariff preferences. And that includes some of our competitors, like Australia and others who can pull themselves in, tuck themselves into that deal. That is on top of course, the TPP countries that went ahead without us, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which the United States chose to leave, but the other countries went ahead and ratified that deal and have lowered their tariff barriers to each other. At the same time, the EU has been very busy completing their agreements with Japan, furthering relationships in Africa, with Mercosur in South America, and active in Asia as well. And so for a sector like agriculture in the United States, where we're so export dependent, making sure that we stay competitive and have a real foothold in some of those dynamic regions will be a priority in the years ahead, and something for the Almond Board and other ag producers in the US to think about going forward. How do we kind of reestablish that really competitive position, particularly in Asia? And third, I would say when we think about our trade relationships, some of the areas I think both of opportunity and of tension are not just about trade, it's trade and. What do the environmental provisions in trade agreements look like? What are the expectations for labor standards? So trade and environment, trade and labor, trade and manufacturing or subsidies, trade and data privacy and digital flows. Those are going to be the areas, I think, that that we need to keep an eye on. And you should expect more attention to what is the template, what are the standards we expect in those trade and areas, to be debated and thought through before we're ready to launch any new trade deals going forward. And of course, we have to remember that before we get to trade, we are in the middle of a global pandemic. 275,000 Americans have died at this point, and the economic toll of that is hugely significant in terms of unemployment. You know, in the food and beverage sector, worker health and safety, you know, restaurants, the purchasers of our products that are hanging on, or many have gone out of business. And so we should expect that while trade is really important, there are a lot of things on the plate of this new administration coming in that will likely take priority before those things. But back to this briefly, this trade and piece. I think when we talk about trade and trade conditions, we often put it in the context of what are government rules that are going to be made. And certainly, I think sustainability requirements to participate in farm programs, to qualify for certain incentives, border measures that might be put in place on climate may look at what is the footprint of these products. So there's certainly a governmental side to that, and something you want to watch and participate in. But some of those same supply chain type requirements on transparency and traceability and really sort of tracking food through the system, I think we're used to doing that when it comes to food safety. We're now going to have to do that based on the food story, both its environmental footprint, but also what are the relationships to farmers, to communicate to communities and workers along the way. And I think we should expect that some of those mandates for tracking that will not just come from governments, they'll come from international processors and retailers and others who have made voluntary commitments on climate, on you know, social justice, worker issues, and need to be able to show that they're actually meeting those commitments. And almonds will need to be part of that story. So that's sort of the overview I see, the combination of government and private entities helping to sort of steer the agriculture environment going forward. And with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Darci. Really a lot of food for thought there. And this whole idea of what is that food story and what is competitiveness really look like in the future, I think is something that really is going to drive the way we need to operate. Now, Krysta, I mean, hearing some of these trends and thoughts about what's happening globally, I mean, you've been seeing a lot of this really play out in a number of different agricultural settings. How do you see this really impacting the farm level and really the way agriculture needs to look at itself as it goes forward?
Thank you, Julie. It's great to be with you, and we have a long time friendship, so I appreciate the invitation, and always honored to be on any panel with Darci Vetter, a former colleague in the Obama administration and friend for a long time as well. And just I'm taking notes mentally as I listen to Darci every time, so this is quite an honor. I am sorry that we're not in person. Going to California and learning from all of you would have been a lot of fun. Those hallway talks, those dinners, those breakfast, coffee breaks. But in lieu of that, it's great to be able to come together to share ideas and thoughts and kind of intelligence about what we're seeing in an ever-changing environment for agriculture. And it really is global. And for the U.S. to remain that source of choice, no matter what product it is, us wanting to be at the top of importers' minds and consumers around the world mind, I just think we have to think a little differently. And I believe in the U.S. we are. We're recognizing, as Darci pointed out, sometimes it's global decisions, whether they're governments or those multinationals who source from all of us, the pressures they are feeling from a growing and more aware and sophisticated consumer. who really will put their pocketbook, their decisions, because they have a lot of choices on what they buy and what they eat. And they want to know where it comes from. They want to know that the folks who are producing it are just as committed to things they care about. And they're looking more closely. The internet opens up the ability to, look backwards to see where products come from, what the commitments are from producers. And I'll be honest, at dairy, we feel that front and center. We're a very consumer facing product, as you know, in households, feeding kids. It's a lot of the same issues you deal with. So, parents are really very sensitive to all these issues, and they look very closely. We look at dairy at the intersection of really the sustainability and nutrition. We call it sustainable nutrition, just those intersections of what comes together. And all of our farmers just really have to think about not just having a good nutritious product, which had been the halo for years for many of our products, is not enough. That footprint matters too. So I know the dairy industry made, ambitious goals, very public goals this spring, which we're starting to really accelerate and talk about, because the sourcing of up the line, the folks who are buying our products for to use, in their products around the world, said we got to know where your commitment is. So it does come back to the farmer. I am first to say that farmers are great stewards of natural resources. I grew up on a farm in Georgia, a peanut farm, and that's how Julie and I first connected, was through peanuts, not a tree crop, but it's certainly one that matters, is near and dear to my heart. And so I know that my family has always cared about the farm. Darci as well grew up on a farm in another part of the country. So we shared that, knowledge that farmers do care about how they produce food. They are very committed to the environment. They don't always know how to measure it. They don't always know how to talk about it. They don't really always want the spotlight on what they're doing. But when it pencils out, when they can say, I can make this choice or this choice and the one that's better for the environment, they're going to do it. It means productivity. It means they're taking care of their factory, if you will, to produce the next crop. So I think that we just have to find a way to connect the dots for consumers, to be more aware, to be more sensitive to their questions, to listen, as I say, with a capital L, not listen to persuade, not listen to change their minds, because we often do. And sometimes I have caught myself on certain issues, maybe biotech, I'll pick that because it's not quite the issue for either of our industries. When I would get questions about biotech after 20 years, I would roll my eyes. I'm like, we're still there. We're still asking these questions. And I would immediately want to get the gotcha. I know more than you do. I know the science. I know the history. But the listeners would just turn off. They didn't want to hear that. They wanted me to listen to why they have questions and concerns. And I think it's the same thing when we think about the environment or the other pressures in agriculture. Our listeners, often consumers and customers, don't know agriculture like we do. We assume they know we're going to do the right thing, but you can't. And so you got to listen to their questions. You got to learn from what they're asking and their source of information. And I think that will really help every farmer do a better job of meeting those demands that are coming, at them, which seems floodgates at times from those who we're selling to and our customers, certainly globally. The other thing I would just say that farmers need to pay attention what is happening around the world. Watch what's happening in Europe. It sets the stage on in the environment and policies, not just for European countries, but for Asia and Africa. They look to Europe for direction and see the trends and see the cultural changes. They also impact the Americas as well. So I think we just have to have a keen eye to what's happening around the world, try to stay ahead of it, certainly not play catch up. Nobody can produce better than our farmers. I mean, I know that with my heart and soul. I know we have great products. You pick one, pick almonds, pick dairy, pick anything, peanuts, whatever. I know we have the best, but having the best product is not enough. You really have to think about how you're doing it, why you're doing it, and be able to be more open about it, to be more transparent, and realize that accountability has to rest on that farm. Obviously, our processing partners as well have a big play in this, and others, our government, we need support there. but it's not as simple as it used to be. And I don't think we're going backwards. And we work a lot with Darci in my industry and her group, looking at numbers, looking at metrics, listening again to what the trends are and where they might lead, so we can do a better job of keeping our farmers informed, helping them make good, wise decisions for their operations. So I do this to keep farmers on the farm. That is my motivation, is to make sure they not only survive, but they can thrive in an ever-changing environment. So I look forward to talking. I know Darci has a lot of probably facts and figures that she's really good at showing us, or more insights, but I think this is a good discussion. I applaud the industry for being bold, for being brave. Have these kind of conversations that make some producers uncomfortable. Some farmers don't want to have these conversations, but my guess is if they don't, they won't be farming a decade from now, and we want to make sure that they are. So thanks, Julie, Darci. I look forward to a continued discussion.
Great. Well, thank you both. And I think there are really some very important concepts that you're both pointing out. This whole idea of trade or nutritious sustainability. I mean, the idea that a lot of what we've been doing is really the direction we need to continue to head into. But this idea of how do you keep that transparency? How do you make sure that consumers of today understand that we do have the same motivations and objectives? And so how do you see that really starting to play out? I mean, as we talk about trade, and it's not trade and food safety alone, sustainability. How does that really start playing out in this global environment? What do consumers really want to hear?
I just, Krysta had alluded to sort of trying to categorize and bring a little bit of data to that discussion about how consumers talk about their expectations. So if I share a little bit of that now, maybe we can, it'll help us lead into a little further discussion about what sort of table stakes and expectations that you don't necessarily get credit for having a safe, quality, dependable product. People expect that, right? That's table stakes. The question is, what more do you bring to the table? And Edelman does a trust barometer each year where we talk to 34,000 consumers in 28 markets globally, and we ask them about their trust in the media, in government, in NGOs, and in business. We really dig into that business sector and ask them, what are your expectations about how business behaves? And the expectation is, of course, well, quality product, safe product, what you're offering, your ability as a company, that's just underlying expectation. What's on top of that is what's kind of been interesting and growing. And really things that they highlight are a greater purpose. Like, does your business exist just to make something? Or do you have a larger commitment to your community, your world, your workers? How do you behave in context? To transparency. Are you willing to tell us what you're doing, why you're doing it, to give us some insight, inside the manufacturing facility, inside your business decisions? And interestingly, partnership was really valued. And, I think in this time where we are facing, a global pandemic, we have these big challenges, it sort of magnified the fact that no one entity or sector can accomplish, can solve these problems on their own. And I think one of the really interesting things we found in this year's trust barometer was that no sector, media, government, business, NGOs, none of them were seen as being both competent and ethical. So business was seen as being most competent, but not being ethical. NGOs were seen as being very ethical, but not particularly effective or competent. And I think really discouragingly, both government and media were seen as neither ethical nor competent in terms of, a score above 50 on a scale to 100. Now, after COVID hit, those numbers changed some, in part because I think people, and the government numbers in particular, went up. I think in part because people realize that government is there for times when you need a public good. and that kind of infrastructure to combat it was irreplaceable. But still, I think what it says is if you really want public trust that we're getting a handle on sustainability, that we're going to take care of our more equitable society, you got to work together. Business, government, NGOs, kind of verifying, helping each other, leaning in where it is. And 64% of all of those surveyed said that they expect that companies specifically should be a force for good and for positive change. And just reinforcing what Krysta said, they agreed with the statement that my wallet is my voice. And so particularly how they, interact with the business sector, they may choose a brand, switch brands, avoid or boycott a brand based on the way, the stance or the action that those companies, those farmers, those industries are taking on societal issues that they care about. And so figuring out how to engage and talk about, I think, Krysta said it very, very well. We know farmers care about sustainability. We know farmers care about the health and welfare of the workers on their farms. Those are part of their family, their success, the longevity of their business. But figuring out how you share that is important because consumers are really looking for it.
I'll take it from there, Julie. And I think that what Darci just said should really make us think in agriculture about where consumer confidence and trust lie. And I think we look at that a great bit in the dairy industry, thinking about, how do we, earn that back? And I think you earn trust. You don't just get it, you earn it. And so we've lost it, not because maybe we were not doing as good a job, maybe because we were not talking about it in the right ways, maybe we were not explaining those commitments. So being more visible, being more active, being more open, bringing consumers in. We've been doing some virtual farm tours during COVID, and you do reach more people that way. It's not the same. You don't, smell the cows or hear them mooing or get to pet them or touch them or feed them something. But more and more people are going to some of those sites because they are so curious. They really want to know. They're very much interested. The other thing that I think that Darci hit on, which is very powerful for all of us, I think, is partnerships and the value of making sure you're judged by who you're partnering with. That's for sure. So looking at organizations and groups that can stretch you, that can give you credibility, that are not rubber stamps, that are not just the echo of what you want them to say. Some folks that make you uncomfortable as farmers who, like, I didn't think I'd ever work with WWF or some of the environmental groups. We're having to do that more and more and be more visible about it. We're also working with multinationals, those who use a lot of dairy. For instance, Nestle joined us in our environmental push and goals with pledge of money to help farmers find some answers to get to further down the road on the environmental front. We have another announcement next week from another multinational because their consumers want to know where they're sourcing from and who they're sourcing from, and it matters to them, and they have choices. So we're coming together, but it's not only just the money, which helps us do research, helps us do measurement, helps us work with more farmers. I cannot say that in the importance of having others' dollars at the table, because all this can't be done on the backs of farmers or out of their pocketbooks, to make these very ambitious goals for us being carbon neutral or better by 2050 and water and water quality, nutrient management, all those kind of goals that we have set. But it's also standing shoulder to shoulder with some of these organizations, being able to publicly say, we're working together. We're going to find answers together. If dairy wants to be an environmental solution, it's going to take a broader group of people. It's going to take folks in universities and scientists. It's going to take consumer groups, environmental groups, multinationals. Farmers cannot do all of this alone. It's not because they don't want to. The answers not are always there. There's research, there's measurement, there's questions that have to be answered. So we are looking for light thinking partners who test us, who stretch us, who challenge us as an industry, and consumers take note. They recognize when it's an unusual relationship, an unusual bedfellow, if you will, over the norm. So I think we all have to be a little more open-minded, not go where it's comfortable, not talk just to each other, but talk to folks who make us, as Secretary Vilsack used to say to me, you got to go in the lion's den. I know where you're comfortable. I want you to go where you're not. And I think that is the challenge for us in agriculture, is making sure that we are doing that. And sometimes it's a global audience. I mean, some of the toughest meetings I've ever had have been in Europe, when I clearly was not, I was the only person interested in agriculture the way we farm in the US. And everything else was thinking that we were bad. We're bigger, we're badder, trying to really dispute those myths is something that I think it's all of our responsibilities in agriculture, not just one sector, not just one crop, one part of our industry. It's all of us making sure that we're doing that in support of the greater understanding of the commitment of sustainability for our nutritious and safe, healthy products.
Well, coming back to what you were just saying too about those unlikely alliances and partnerships and stepping into the breach, if you will, Europe is really taking a lot of these policy initiatives and setting bold goals. And the question is really, is it aspirational, or is this really going to be a goal? But clearly it's going to impact the supply chain and how we engage in a market like Europe. So I was really pleased, Darci, when you were saying you see a glimmer of hope in Europe. And I think a lot of people probably don't feel that way when they think of all the requirements that are coming down the line. But this idea of aligning objectives, the environmental goals, the sustainability initiatives that Europe's talking about, how do we take that and actually show ourselves in a positive light, and the fact that we're already doing a lot of these things? We've already met a lot of these objectives. How do we take that forward and communicate that to the policy people as well as consumers who are hearing all of this on a European level?
Well, maybe I'll start with the policy side, and Krysta can come in on some of the things she's been doing on the consumer side. With some of our clients, and then just given past work on the government side, I have been reading with interest the new farm to fork strategy, that the EU has put out, how the role agriculture will play in the overall European Green Deal. And I think what's interesting is you can read that with all of the, oh yeah, we expected Europe to say this and we expected that. But if you read the document, they also left open for discussion a number of areas. They've set out a broad policy, but they haven't said how they're going to achieve it yet. And, just in the past couple of weeks, you've seen Copa-Cogeca, their big, agricultural organization, come out and say, where's the assessment of what this is going to cost and the feasibility? And we want to know, as European farmers, how you think you're going to accomplish this. What's the assessment of costs and benefits, and how can we engage? And so there's a broad set of goals which are not that different in many ways. Having agriculture contribute to climate, reducing the use of petrochemicals, thinking about opportunities for farms of all sizes, for value-added agriculture, making sure farmers can stay on the farm. Like, what does the value proposition look like for different crops? So the underlying themes, I think, are really similar. And I think we're at this really crucial point of time where we can say, here's the way we're addressing those same underlying themes. Here's how we're debating doing it. And so it's not necessarily that you're going to start to measure for sustainability that we're concerned about. It's, are you going to measure outcomes, or are you going to measure processes, to get there? And can you leave the door open for different ways of achieving the same result? But if we want them to leave the door open, I think we have to say, we're actually pretty committed on our end, and we're pretty confident that we're going to be able to meet the results that you're looking for. And so, I think the environmental imperatives around climate, concerns about productivity, the fact that COVID has highlighted areas where we have the same business constraints. Europe didn't have workers who could move across borders during COVID to pick their crops, just as we had same issues in California. And protecting, the health of those workers once they were there. The evaporation of restaurant and food service supply chains left farmers in Europe with some really hard choices and no markets for their products, just as it did in the United States. So I think that there's the spotlight on the business fundamentals and where we might have some more things in common. I think we have to quickly sort of seize on that conversation to say, we want to tackle those things with an eye on sustainability, just like you do. And that if the overall goal is thinking about how agriculture can contribute to climate, gosh, we've got quite a conversation about that going on in the US too. Wouldn't it be great eventually if our farmers could participate in ecosystem services markets or carbon markets that were interoperable between the US and Europe? But if we make our requirements for what is a credit or what you have to do to participate so different, we might be limiting opportunities for both of our farmers. So I just think it's a really dynamic and interesting time, but that we don't have time to waste. And there's some, common purpose there. And there's an opportunity for farmers to think about creating values in different ways rather than just the almond itself, but how they produce it. So I'm actually relatively optimistic. I think it's going to be hard. Do not get me wrong. But I think there's some really interesting opportunities for engagement.
I don't
Krysta,
disagree
how do
with
you feel?
Darci. I don't disagree with her. And I think that a couple of things that she hit on that I'll just expand on, and that's that we have to show up. We have to be there. And there's part of our industry, I think, that says, heck no, I won't go. And I'm just not going to listen. I'm not going to participate. That's over there. I'm going to do what I always have done. And I get that mentality. My daddy's a little bit like that, so I understand. But I think those who show up are going to make the decisions and are going to make the rules. And I think we have to be there. We have to listen. We have to participate. We have to talk about the great things we are doing in the U.S. We have to define ourselves. I say this over and over to U.S. Dairy. Don't let others describe and define you. You do it. You know your industry better than anybody. Don't let NGOs or the civil society or competitors decide who you are. You get to tell who you are. You get to talk about your own commitment. Tell your story about the advances, about the changes, the new technologies that you're embracing, the new farm practices that you're doing, for water or for nutrient management in our case. You get to do that. Nobody's going to know unless you do. Drive this agenda yourself. Don't play victim. As you look at what is happening with the UN, which is an area I focus on quite a bit, looking at the Food System Summit that's coming next fall, that agenda can be very scary for U.S. agriculture. And so we continue to be at the table. I participate in meetings when often I'm the only American citizen involved. It's folks from around the globe who are involved in these activities. So I encourage y'all to think about getting involved, listening, participating in global activities, because they do set the stage for how food systems are going to work in the future. And we want to be involved in helping to design those food systems. We want to make sure that our way of agriculture is included, not discluded, and again, is better understood, because I just don't think it is. But we can tell that story. We can be there. We can be just as aggravating, just as loud, just as pushy sometimes as anybody else. But in the light of showing that we have more in common than the differences, as Darci was outlining, often we agree on the what. It's the how. And you don't have to have the stick. You can use the carrot. You can use incentives, which I think we do a real good job of in the U.S. with our USDA programs and other programs that are available for farmers. We, offer incentives for doing additional practices or putting in new technologies. And maybe we need to expand those kind of programs as we start looking to the next farm bill and other legislation. Maybe there's tax incentives for some of the more expensive equipment and things that need to be employed to reach some of these goals and to make sure we are being the stewards that we need to be. So I think we're just, being positive, being supportive, being helpful, saying we are leaders in U.S. agriculture. We lead on so many fronts. We can lead on the environment as well. And I believe that. I'm with Darci. I'm optimistic about how we're positioned in U.S. agriculture. I would put our farmers up against anybody in the world.
Well, I think that's really an important point. No, sorry, Darci.
Yeah, no, I was just going to jump in on something that Krysta said, because I think, in my years of negotiating sort of trade agreements on agriculture is always hard, and it's always this very political sector. And it's part because the last part of that word is culture. And there's a real, there's a mythology around how we've, settled the West, and we farm this land and farmed families as being sort of a bulwark of our values. And I don't disagree with that. We're not the only country that has that, right? Which makes sort of opening up that sector really hard in trade negotiations. Think about the role of the rice farmer in Japan. It's a sort of a fundamental of their sort of national identity, right? But I think sometimes we've done that to the extent that people forget that farming is a business. And so, Krysta's point about incentives and these really small margins that farmers are operating under, part of the transparency story, I think, is being open to saying, here's my aspiration for how my operation will be more sustainable. Here are the things I can afford to do today. Here are the things I want to do tomorrow. Here's how long it would take to get a return on that investment. So I'm not able to do this today versus tomorrow, and a bad weather event or a retaliatory tariff might be the difference between whether I install a methane digester this year or 5 years from now. And so those incentives are an important part of that equation. And I think sort of opening that conversation up a little bit to say, like, I've got these trade-offs between, being able to pay my workers on time and what I want and make ends meet, and doing that thing I know I should do and I'm going to do eventually, but I don't know if I can do it today. And that's a real conversation that I think we already have in the manufacturing sector about the return on investment for emission controls and those kinds of things. But we've maybe been more hesitant because it's a little bit of more of a nuanced conversation, but also because we tend to talk about farmers, feeding the world and being this bedrock of our communities, but we forget that they have to make their balance sheets pencil out as well. And that's part of the reality. And I think we need to be engaged in that.
Mm-hmm. No, really good point. Any other thoughts, Krysta, Darci, as we start coming to the end of this conversation? Some incredible concepts about needing to lean into some of these conversations, being more transparent. I think we're almost victims of our success because we're so efficient and we're so effective. Consumers may get a different view, or policymakers get a different view, maybe not understanding innovation and efficiency is not because you're big. You're still family operations, but you have to be smarter about the way you farm, and you have to really help people understand how you farm. Any last thoughts about how we deal with the policy and the consumer side? Any advice to growers as they start looking at the horizon?
I'll just say one thing. I remember being at a farm meeting, and a farmer stood up and told me that he was so proud to be part of the best kept secret in the U.S. And I said, well, that's your problem. I'm glad you're proud, because it is a great industry. But the secret part really gives, me some heartburn and concern. I think farmers are running businesses, and I think, how Darci described it is exactly right. It is a business first. It may be a family business, but my mama always said to me, we're a family business, but we got to make a living. it's a business first. It's not a hobby. It is not something you like to do. It's you want to do, you need to do, to pay your bills just like every other type of industry. So I think, getting out of our comfort zone a little bit, as I continue to say, being able to share what we do, the why we do it, the how we will do it with the right resources and support and incentives and help. There are questions we don't have answers to. We need others, other partners to help us find those answers as we look down the road. A lot of farmers, it's different with a tree crop because you have a longer investment, but a lot of folks in the row crop world where I grew up, I'm worried about today. Mother Nature is a fickle business partner for all of us. And, I'm really worried about my labor today. I'm worried about weather. I'm worried about prices. I'm really focused on what's happening, and somebody else has got to look down the road. Well, I just don't think that's a luxury we have. I think it's, you've got to have one eye to your business today because obviously that's critical, but you ought to also have to be looking at what's coming around the corner and recognizing things are changing. And I think COVID made us aware of how the vulnerabilities of our supply systems, our vulnerabilities of our partners, whether it's retail chains, whether it's shipping, whether it's, I know in dairy, for an example, we had a hard time early on just getting truck drivers to come to the dairy every day because there's a limited number of them, and many of them had COVID and didn't feel comfortable coming on property or vice versa. So we really recognize our vulnerabilities and where we need to think about this food system and this future, and certainly labor for your membership, Julie, it has to be a big issue as well, and supply. So let's take everything we've learned and push ourselves to go, be better, do more, tell our story in a clearer, more transparent way, recognizing the accountability rests on our farms, but with a lot of those who support us and other partners who want to help. And I just appreciate being here. It's been a fun discussion.
Great. Thank you.
I think Krysta's right on. I would only add one piece, which is that telling that story is important. And when the story comes from the mouths of farmers themselves, I think it's even more effective. That sincerity, the authenticity, the commitment that you have to your operations really comes through. And I think that policymakers, leaders, but everyday consumers connect with that as well. And so not every farmer loves to be on camera or on the spotlight, but I think nobody's a better spokesperson for the good work that you do than you. So.
Well, thank you both. I think that whole idea of the best kept secret is agriculture here in the U.S. is really an important concept. And as we look to the horizon, there are going to be a lot of challenges, but I think we're all pretty well positioned if we just lean into it to really address what's going on. So I hate to say it, I think we've pretty much come to the end of time we have for this morning's session. Let me first thank Krysta and Darci for a great conversation. I think you've really teed up some thoughts and ideas that are going to be really important as we look at what our path is going to be going forward. And I hope that for those of you who participated in the session today, listening to the conversation, I hope it really gave you some thoughts about what do you want to do in your own operation? How can you be more vocal about what you're achieving and what you're facing? Because both of those issues are really going to help shape the conversation, whether it's with our consumers or with policymakers. They need to understand what it is we're facing, and only we can tell that story. So with that, let me also thank Yosemite Farm Credit that sponsored this general session, and invite those of you who have joined us today, please stay with us. Breakout sessions will be starting shortly. You'll be able to hear more about some of the marketing investments that are being made around the world, what consumers are saying. You'll also have a chance to hear a bit more about California and federal regulatory landscape. What are some of the challenges there? And we'll also have a session this morning that will talk about the 2021 trade agreements and what that horizon may look like as well. So with that, hope you will join us, go see the exhibitors, and of course, come visit us at the Almond Board booth on the conference platform. Tomorrow's the last day of our 2020 Almond Conference. We hope you'll join us when we have Charlie Cook actually kicking off the general session, talking about the election. And that has got to be a session not to miss. So with that, all of you, thank you very much. Stay healthy, stay safe, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.